So we have already seen in the last presentation that we have still these uncertainties also with regard to the cropping season in those models, and it's very hard to simulate this. And even when you would use our data that we have shown before with regard to the sowing date in the model directly, then you have the problem, what are you doing with the climate change scenarios? Do you just assume that sowing dates will not change? No, that's also not realistic. And so the only solution is to really simulate these growing seasons. And we wanted to improve the information with regard to irrigation for India. And as you will see in our presentation, we also put a focus on these seasonal aspects or on the temporal changes. First of all, why irrigation in India? In general, we have a lot of irrigated land in India, as you can see here in this map. And so at global scale, about 20% of irrigated land is in India, but also a lot of the global population is living there, and we also have a large extent of the global crop area there. So it's very relevant. And there's another reason why we picked out India. As you can see here, the importance of irrigation has changed also over time. So from 17% of the cropland being irrigated, it increased to almost 50% in the meantime. And as you can see here also, the extent of the irrigated land, which is grown more than once in the year, is also increasing. So about 30% of the cropland is multiple cropping land in at least under irrigated conditions. Yeah, another interesting aspect is the strong seasonality. So for example, with regard to precipitation, you can see here the monsoon season. So this is a mean across whole of India with regard to the monthly precipitation. And we have here the so-called Kharif season, which is the monsoon season. And then we have the dry Rabi and Zaid seasons. And when we compute then the balance between precipitation and evapotranspiration, then we can see that here in this period we have more precipitation, so we have quite humid conditions, and in the rest of the year it's very dry and arid. So it means the drought stress under rainfed conditions or the irrigation water requirements will change a lot depending on in which season a crop is cultivated. Yeah, and we don't only have these seasonal patterns in general. We also see that there is an overlay with strong spatial patterns. So we have here regions which are more humid in the east of India, and then very dry regions here in the west. And you can also see the big difference between the three growing seasons in India. With regard to the crops, there are crops which are grown in all the three seasons, like rice, but there are also other crops like the temperate cereals, and they are only grown in this dry Rabi period. So it means they will face a completely different drought stress, and irrigation has a different impact for these crops. Yeah, and from our previous product, the Merca 2000, you can also see that the importance of irrigation is also differing a lot in the Kharif, in the humid season. The percentage of crop that is irrigated is much lower, and in the dry seasons, irrigation is used more frequently. And this also differs across crops. So it means there's a very complex cropping pattern in India, and you have this overlay of spatial and temporal patterns. And therefore, the objective was to improve the data that are there, mainly by using national information and to introduce also this seasonality. So the input data, first of all, we used national land use statistics or crop statistics per district. It's a bit difficult to see. So these blue lines here are the district boundaries, and the red lines are the state boundaries in India. And we obtained here from the NIC statistics the growing area of different crops. And interestingly, it's not only at district level, it also tells about the season in which the crop is grown. So for some crops, this information was not available, and therefore we used in addition these crop advisories, which report the state of the crops in different periods of the year, to find out in which season the crop is cultivated in specific states or districts. So by fusion of this information, we developed these monthly irrigated and rain-fed growing areas for these 20 crops in India. And the question was then, of course, well, we have now this information pooled together at district level, but we also want to see the spatial pattern below, and therefore we used in addition remote sensing data, also a national product. And what is interesting here is that this also provides seasonal information. So you see here the extent of crops, either in double or triple cropping systems in red, or in the Kharif, Rabi or Zaid season only. Plantation is the whole year, and fallow land is not used in the specific year. So this data set is it's in 56 meter resolution. So, and we combined this with our district level information to produce maps. First, when we aggregate to 500 meter, it looks like this. So you can see here we have, dependent on the season, strong spatial patterns. So in the Kharif season, there's cultivation almost everywhere. In the Rabi and Zaid season, it's different. And the permanent growing areas, so for perennial crops, are here in the south and in the east mainly. And we also have a significant area which is not used for cultivation in the specific year. Okay, so when we combine the information, of course, we can make first a direct link between the statistics at district level and the remote sensing information, because there's a match of these classes. But in addition, of course, these crops can also grow in multiple cropping areas, and then combined a Kharif with a Rabi season crop or a Zaid season crop. So by doing this, we found out we got a big problem, because we use independent data, and these data were not consistent to each other. So it means we found big differences, as you can see here. This is the difference between the area, the cropping area from these two products, from the remote sensing, which is called Buvan here, and the NIC statistics. And this is the difference between these two data sets related to the whole district area. So it's quite some difference. And we therefore needed to adjust the data. And in the first step, we were using remote sensing data from different years. And for each district, we selected the year which is closest to our district level statistics. So the result you can see here. So for many districts we have data around year 2005, but for some of them the agreement was larger when more recent data were used. So this removed a part of the differences between these data sets, but not all, and therefore we allowed then or we modified the area of these crops with this fallow category. So it means when the statistics told there's more cropland used in a specific year than the remote sensing data showed, then we used fallow land and assigned the crops to these regions and vice versa. So the results, as you can see here, for India as a whole, the growing area is different in these 3 seasons, and also the contribution of irrigated or irrigation is different. And for the different crops, you can also see major differences. Wheat, for example, is only grown here in this Rabi season, and it is to a high percentage, more than 80% of the wheat growing area is irrigated. When you look here at sunflower, it's also grown in this season, but it's only very little irrigation. And then there are other crops which are irrigated depending on the season, and so it's a quite diverse picture what we draw here. So this is then the map at district level. So here in the first you see the irrigated land of the different crops in relation to the whole district area. Then here's the cropping area of the crop, and this is then the ratio between both. And as you can see here, so wheat is to a high percentage irrigated, while other crops like sorghum are mainly rain-fed. So there's a big difference across the crops and also in the spatial pattern. Here we have 2 crops and the seasons, and again the irrigation, cropping, and the ratio of both. And as you can see here, there's a big difference between the pattern for rice and wheat, for example. Yeah, and this is for maize and soybean. We have seen already before in soybean we have the major growing area here in the central part of India, but as you can see here, there is very little irrigation, and it's also in the Kharif or Zaid seasons. When we compare this to our previous global product, to the Merca 2000, so we can see there are major differences. For example, for wheat, Merca assumed that wheat is grown in all seasons, while the national statistics reported only in this season. And also for other crops there are differences, so it's really the data. So there are differences for sure, and also the spatial pattern looks completely different, or at least for some seasons. So with regard to the rice, I think we will hear some more about this issue from Nelson later, from Andy later. But according to these statistics, we have here in the Kharif season the rice more in the western part or in the whole country, and then in the dry periods it's more in the eastern part. So there's a general trend which we can see here. And this is the percentage of the rice growing area which is irrigated, and you can see here the big differences also between Merca and the new product which is based on national data. So the conclusions, we think that this consideration of seasonal crop data is really required for these multiple cropping regions like India. and that there's a very complex pattern. And we also have seen that these remote sensing based products offer an independent opportunity to map these patterns and should also be considered. And I think this is now a new data set which will enter the Geoshare, the hub, and based on this there can be other workflows then, and so my vision would be that some crop models take these data and really try and start to simulate these patterns in multiple cropping regions. This would be very important to my mind also for climate change research, because in most of the models it's still assumed that this pattern will not change in the future, which I think is not really realistic. And so this potential of changes in the growing season and also in the cropping pattern, this is something which requires more research in the future. And this data set can be used as one starting point to parameterize the models. Thank you.